Being wet, tired, and hungry had become a part of life. It often had been, come to think of it. He closed his eyes and felt the rain patter against his skin, heard the water lapping on the shingle. He knelt by the lake, pulled the stopper from his flask and pushed it under the surface, watched the bubbles break as it filled up. Malachus Quai stumbled out of the bushes, breathing fast and shallow. He sank down to his knees, crawled against the roots of a tree, coughed out phlegm onto the pebbles. His coughing sounded bad now. It came right up from his guts and made his whole rib-cage rattle. He was even paler than he had been when they first met, and a lot thinner. Logen was somewhat thinner, too. These were lean times, all in all. He walked over to the haggard apprentice and squatted down. "Just give me a moment." Quai closed his sunken eyes and tipped his head back. "Just a moment." His mouth hung open, the tendons in his scrawny neck standing out. He looked like a corpse already. "Don't rest too long. You might never get up." Logen held out the flask. Quai didn't even lift his arm to take it, so Logen put it against his lips and tipped it up a little. He took a wincing swallow, coughed, then his head dropped back against the tree like a stone. "Do you know where we are?" asked Logen. The apprentice blinked out at the water as though he'd only just noticed it. "This must be the north end of the lake. There should be a track." His voice had sunk to a whisper. "At the southern end, there's a road with 2 stones." He gave a sudden violent cough, swallowed with difficulty. "Follow the road over the bridge, and you're there," he croaked. Logen looked off along the beach at the dripping trees. "How far is it?" No answer. He took hold of the sick man's bony shoulder and shook it. Quai's eyelids flickered open. He stared up blearily, trying to focus. "How far?" 40 miles. Logen sucked his teeth. Quai wouldn't be walking 40 miles. He'd be lucky to make 40 strides on his own. He knew it well enough. You could see it in his eyes. He'd be dead soon, Logen reckoned, a few days at the most. He'd seen stronger men die of a fever. 40 miles. Logen thought about it carefully, rubbing his chin with his thumb. 40 miles. "Shit," he whispered. He dragged the pack over and pulled it open. They had some food left, but not much. A few shreds of tough dried meat, a heel of mouldy black bread. He looked out over the lake, so peaceful. They wouldn't be running out of drinking water any time soon, at least. He pulled his heavy cookpot out of his pack and set it down on the shingle. They'd been together a long time, but there was nothing left to cook. You can't become attached to things, not out here in the wild. He tossed the rope away into the bushes, then threw the lightened pack over his shoulder. Quai's eyes had closed again, and he was scarcely breathing. Logen still remembered the first time he had to leave someone behind, remembered it like it was yesterday. Strange how the boy's name had gone, but the face was with him still. The shanker had taken a piece out of his thigh, a big piece. He'd moaned all the way. He couldn't walk. The wound was going bad. He was dying anyway. They had to leave him. No one had blamed Logen for it. The boy had been too young. He should never have gone. Bad luck was all, could happen to anyone. He'd cried after them as they made their way down the hillside in a grim, silent group, heads down. Logen seemed to hear the cries even when they'd left him far behind. He could still hear them. In the wars it had been different. Men dropped from the columns all the time on the long marches, in the cold months. First they fell to the back, then they fell behind, then they fell over. The cold, the sick, the wounded. Logen shivered and hunched his shoulders. At first he'd tried to help them. Then he became grateful he wasn't one of them. Then he stepped over the corpses and hardly noticed them. You learn to tell when someone isn't getting up again. He looked at Malachus Quai. One more death in the wild was nothing to remark upon. You have to be realistic, after all. The apprentice started from his fitful sleep and tried to push himself up. His hands were shaking bad. He looked up at Logen, eyes glittering bright. "I can't get up," he croaked. "I know. I'm surprised you made it this far." It didn't matter so much now. Logen knew the way. If he could find that track, he might make 20 miles a day. "If you leave me some of the food, perhaps, after you get to the library, someone—" "No," said Logen, setting his jaw. "I need the food." Quai made a strange sound, somewhere between a cough and a sob. Logen leaned down and set his right shoulder in Quai's stomach, pushed his arm under his back. "I can't carry you 40 miles without it," and he straightened up, hauling the apprentice over his shoulder. He set off down the shore, holding Quai in place by his jacket, his boots crunching into the wet shingle. The apprentice didn't even move, just hung there like a sack of wet rags, his limp arms knocking against the backs of Logan's legs. When he'd made it 30 strides or so, Logen turned around and looked back. The pot was sitting forlorn by the lake, already filling up with rainwater. They'd been through a lot together, him and that pot. "Fare you well, old friend." The pot did not reply. "Out there, by the lake, you could have left me. I would have left me." Logen frowned. Time was he'd have done it and never given it a second thought. But things change. "I've left a lot of people in my time. Reckon I'm sick of that feeling." The apprentice pursed his lips and looked out at the valley, the woods, the distant mountains. "I never saw a man killed before." "You're lucky." "You've seen a lot of death, then?" Logen winced. In his youth, he would have loved to answer that very question. He could have bragged and boasted and listed the actions he'd been in, the named men he'd killed. He couldn't say now when the pride had dried up. It had happened slowly, as the wars became bloodier, as the causes became excuses, as the friends went back to the mud, one by one. Logen rubbed at his ear, felt the big notch that Tulduru's sword had made long ago. He could have stayed silent, but for some reason he felt the need to be honest. "I've fought in 3 campaigns," he began, "in 7 pitched battles, in countless raids and skirmishes and desperate defences and bloody actions of every kind. I've fought in the driving snow, the blasting wind, the middle of the night. I've been fighting all my life, one enemy or another, one friend or another. I've known little else. I've seen men killed for a word, for a look, for nothing at all. A woman tried to stab me once for killing her husband, and I threw her down a well. And that's far from the worst of it. Life used to be as cheap as dirt to me, cheaper. I've fought 10 single combats, and I won them all. But I fought on the wrong side and for all the wrong reasons. I've been ruthless and brutal, and a coward. I've stabbed men in the back, burned them, drowned them, crushed them with rocks, killed them asleep, unarmed or running away. I've run away myself more than once. I've pissed myself with fear. I've begged for my life. I've been wounded often and badly, and screamed and cried like a baby whose mother took her tit away. I've no doubt the world would be a better place if I'd been killed years ago. But I haven't been, and I don't know why." He looked down at his hands, pink and clean on the stone. "There are few men with more blood on their hands than me. None that I know of. The Bloody 9, they call me, my enemies, and there's a lot of them. Always more enemies and fewer friends. Blood gets you nothing but more blood. It follows me now always like my shadow, And like my shadow, I can never be free of it. I should never be free of it. I've earned it. I've deserved it. I've sought it out. Such is my punishment. And that was all. Logen breathed a deep, ragged sigh and stared out at the lake. He couldn't bring himself to look at the man beside him, didn't want to see the expression on his face. Who wants to learn he's keeping company with the bloody Nine, a man who's wrought more death than the plague, and with less regret? They could never be friends now, not with all those corpses between them. Then he felt Quai's hand clap him on the shoulder. "Well, there it is," he said, grinning from ear to ear. "But you saved me, and I'm right grateful for it." "I've saved a man this year and only killed 4. I'm born again." And they both laughed for a while, and it felt good.